Hello and welcome to another episode of Real Talk. I'm Niall Murphy, CEO and co-founder of EVRYTHNG. Real Talk is a new series where we bring influential industry minds together to discuss important challenges and issues that are shaping the consumer goods industry. Today we're going to continue a conversation with FD Wilder. We're going to focus on the action steps and investments that consumer goods brands should be making as they flip the VUCA. You'll have to go back to the last episode to find out what that means and move ahead in the challenging new world. Look forward to a discussion about farms and gardens and see what that means as well. So FD, is great to be having another conversation with him. FD is a former P&G innovation leader with nearly 40 years at the organization. FD currently serves as a McKinsey & Company senior advisor and an adjunct professor at the Harvard Business School. When not educating or advising with businesses, you'll find FD advising the 75th Regiment of the Army Rangers, burning off extra energy at his local CrossFit gym. So with no further ado, let's have a Real Talk conversation with FD Wilder. FD, welcome back to Real Talk. Good to see you again.
Likewise.
So I wanted to pick up on our last conversation, and we talked about flipping the VUCA as individuals and the kind of behaviors that leaders needed to adopt in organizations to change in response to COVID and obviously the other factors changing our environment. So when we think about the organizational tools that are available to leaders as they make the cultural shift that's needed and embrace the new environment, what are those and how do they make them sustainable?
Well, I think a big one is what I call installing a new permanent, to your question around sustainability, growth operating system. And the idea is inside a large traditional company, you would be inventing like a startup would and investing like a VC. So applying the principles of startups and VCs in a large legacy organization. And the metaphor that I like to use here is the farm and the garden. Most of us that work for big companies are on a farm, and you can't bet the farm, right? It's just too big, too many consumers, customers, employees, shareholders counting on us. And so on the farm, there's actually very low appetite for risk and tolerance for failure, and rightly so. A lot of companies, P&G included, what was missing is the garden, and this is the growth operating system. And this is where we actually have a high tolerance for failure and a very high appetite for risk, and we want to be doing lots and lots of experimentation, which is one of the habits, remember, that we talked about of leaders that have embraced a growth mindset. On the farm, that's all about operations and planning, whereas in the garden, it's all about discovery and experimentation. And one of the things that we learned at P&G is those are separate activity systems that need to be run by separate people. It turns out that all of us as leaders have a bias. I happen to have more of a gardener profile. I think you do as well as an entrepreneur, and most companies need both farmers and gardeners.
One of my board members was in a very stark way the other day was saying that in the world we're in now, you either have the stuff that people need or you don't, right? So I guess that would say, to use your metaphor, that you need to assess quickly the size of the farm that you should be maintaining and the size of the garden that you need to grow. Would that be a way of applying that picture towards proportionalizing investment?
Yes, I think that's right. And maybe just to illustrate the point and share a mistake that we made at P&G. You've got, let's say, the marketing director for Tide, and he or she is just trying to keep the brand on the shelf at Walmart. And so that's one part of their job. And then we also asked that same Tide marketing director to invent Tide dry cleaners. Well, that's kind of cruel and unusual punishment. It's just keeping the brand on the shelf at Walmart in and of itself is a full-time job. So he or she was never going to get to inventing Tide dry cleaners. And so it wasn't until we got to that insight that they were separate activity systems that required separate people with different profiles that we really kind of unlocked a lot of innovation and growth.
So you're a senior advisor at McKinsey. What are the priorities? What are the investments that brands and retailers should be making today? How can they organize their thinking around that?
Yes, I'll just offer up this framework, Niall, that is just based on my observations, kind of a horizontal view of the industry. I call it the PS framework. The first one is your portfolio structure, which is kind of, you're either in the business of things that people want or you're not, your earlier comment. And there, you want to be in industries that have a structural tailwind, kind of the inevitability of the outcome, as you were saying on our last episode. And I think on portfolio structure, one of the requirements is you have a kind of a programmatic way of looking at mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, and a very fluid process for allocating resources and capital expenditures. So the first one is portfolio structure, first PS. The second PS is people skills. And here, it's a bit of a balance, because on the one hand, we need to raise the digital IQ of our people, because if we want to raise the digital IQ of brands, at the end of the day, it's people that are the stewards of the brand. So in order to raise the digital IQ of the brand, you have to first raise the digital IQ of the person managing the brand. At the same time, I believe that soft skills will actually be more important than software. So every time I studied the key business driver of a business, I came back to the conclusion that the number one key business driver is actually trust, and which means it's all about the relationship. So while we build our digital IQ, we also have to keep in mind that the soft skills of critical thinking, of communication, of storytelling are also equally important. And then the third PS in my framework here is performance superiority. And I think just being clear on what your strengths are and your proprietary gifts as an organization. I think P&G has done this exceptionally well. We basically said we wanted to be in categories where performance drove brand choice. And that's why we got out of the cosmetics business, for example, because you really can't prove that CoverGirl gets a better smoky eye than L'Oreal Paris. So that doesn't play to our strengths. That actually plays to L'Oreal's strengths, because they're very good at fashions and trends, and we were not. And instead, just be in categories where consumer noticeable superiority is what made the difference at the end of the day.
So
what are your reactions to that framework? Thoughts, builds?
Yeah, I think
criticisms.
I think your point about you can't make a brand or a business digitally fit if the people in it aren't digitally fit first, right? And that's a really critical question towards both training and actually the profile of recruitment and indeed reorganization potentially. And I guess linking it back to your earlier point about the farm and the garden is, and linking it to your point about portfolio, is it suggests that a key leadership decision is to decide whether a business should be moved from the farm to the garden or from the garden to the farm, right? If I'm stressing a metaphor here, right? That's what I that's what I hear. And there's obviously a tremendous shortage of experienced senior leadership with the digital skill sets that might be required. So how do you think organizations can address that problem? We can't magic up a large armada of digital wizards, right? So how do you think organizations can address that?
Well, we did many things, but one thing that we did is we created a mentorship program. So it turns out that we're all mentors and we're all interns at the same time. So I was an intern to Katie Mogenberg. I was also her mentor. She was a younger employee, a marketing technologist. And we created this relationship, and it was sustainable because there was a value exchange there. So it turns out, as her mentor, I have a lot of know-who. Like, I know Niall, and if Katie has a problem where Niall and everything could be part of the solution, I can connect the two of you. What she has that I don't have is a lot of know-how. So she actually knows how TikTok works, and I don't. So I could give her access to my know-who network, and she was giving me access to her know-how network. And that's what created the value exchange and made the relationship sustainable. We both benefited.
I love that. It's about building new networks, right? And that could be happening within the organization. That could be happening with parties that are outside the organization, business partners, service providers, wherever you think that knowledge base is, right? And it's building these new cross-connecting networks. Is that a fair way to describe that?
Correct. And as we talked in the earlier episode, it's one of the habits of a leader that's embraced a growth mindset. They're constantly bringing the outside in and have a strong desire to learn from others. And they have a beginner's mind. They're always asking, why do we do it this way? Why do we do it this way, right? So that's exactly right.
I want to come to back to a specific part of the consumer goods industry, and which is the supply chain, right? This is the spine, the machine that actually allows things to be made and to be got to where they need to be, so to speak, right? And obviously this is a machine that is facing all sorts of challenges of adaptation at this point in time. How do you think about what constitutes an effective response in the supply chain for consumer goods organizations as businesses either are moving to reopen or adjust?
Well, I think you said it exactly right. It is the backbone or the foundation for most, if not all, CPG companies. I mean, at P&G, we had 100,000 employees. 65,000 of them worked in product supply. It's where we deployed most of our capital. And we actually used to say internally that we were in the business of supply. So it's absolutely a critical capability. I think the key challenge is we need to modernize and optimize our supply chain to deliver end-to-end visibility, ensure authenticity of our products. Is how do we invest to modernize, coming up with the funds to do that. And I think that's going to require some creative thinking. At P&G, we would actually internally fund a lot of our, or we had the ambition to internally fund a lot of our investments in technology and in the supply chain by licensing IP invention that they would created, and use those licensing fees as a way to fund our investments and what was needed to modernize our supply chain or other aspects of our digital transformation. So I think the key challenge is the funding, and we need to think creatively about how to manage the funding so that it's not all incremental.
Yeah, the shift on the balance sheet, the emphasis of where investment has to go is really interesting challenge at this point. And we've been seeing some of our customers, whilst on the one hand they are very painfully letting team members go from their organization, on the other hand they're making proactive investments in data capabilities, data acquisition capabilities, data intelligence capabilities and it's really a movement of priority on the balance sheet as to what resource base is going to actually support the future. And so if it was only cost reduction and no capacity creation, then that would be probably a good reason to sell that stock. Whereas if there's a reallocation of resource, it seems like that's obviously investing positively in the future.
And have you seen any clever ways where companies have been able to do that with their balance sheet?
Well, it's about putting in data aggregation or data collection tools across the supply chain, and also incentivizing their suppliers, their producer partners, or their distribution or logistics partners to make similar investments. So we've seen applications of maintenance of sourcing contracts with the proviso that there are investments being made in building digital capability, right? Which is a smart way of saying, yeah, we're going to help you keep in business, but we're going to want you to make sure that you're actually geared to the way we're going to do business, right? Going forward, which I think is leverage, obviously, in the current environment.
Yes, very good.
FD, thank you again for taking the time, and really enjoyed the conversation. So we look forward to having future real talks with you on other things. Hopefully, in a world which is steadily recovering from the challenges we're currently facing. For those of you watching and listening, please, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us directly at realtalk@everything.com.
Cheers now.
Cheers, FD.